Like, do you have something prepared you want to kind of take the lead on, or what? Another week is in the books, so it's time for another show of the D3 Datacast. I can't believe this is our week 4 show already, Matt. It feels like this Division 3 basketball season is going to fly by. It just seems weird to say week 4. It feels like, we're just getting our first glimpse of all these teams. But here we are. It's week 4, and we just had a great weekend at the Great Lakes Invitational hosted by Calvin University. And that's going to give us a lot to talk about. But Matt, let's start with a word of thanks to all involved because once again, it was a great event in a great venue hosted by a great university.
Yeah, first and foremost, special thanks to Ryan Whitnable, the creator, the director, the executive director of the Great Lakes Invitational Tournament, one of the best D3 events out there, in my opinion, maybe the best D3 event out there. He does a great job getting teams from all over the country in here. Great teams, great programs. He runs a terrific tournament. Zach, you're wearing some of the gear that he gave out to players and coaches. And I think it's just fun to have that almost like a college football bowl game atmosphere in the Division III basketball level. So Ryan does a great job. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for inviting us along for the ride as kind of media people who can cover the event just because it's been so much fun. We've gotten to go to 2 GLIs now, last year at Wittenberg, this year at Calvin, and they've been top notch. We have a chance to talk to a bunch of the coaches, Pat McKenzie at St. John's, John Vanderwall at Marietta, Greg Mitchell from Hope, Pete Morant from John Carroll, Jason Zimmerman from Emory, Ryan Kane from Johns Hopkins, JT Gritzmacher from UW La Crosse. We didn't talk to all of those coaches, but we talked to a lot of them, Zach, and they're all just enamored with the Great Lakes Invitational, what it means for their programs, their teams to play other kind of like competition, teams that they want to see in March, if not this year, then next year, or at least let their teams know what the competition out there is like. So I think they were thrilled to play these games, at least to see the competition, get their team going. And I heard from a bunch of them how great this event is. So yeah, thanks for the coaches who took the time to talk to us too, and for Ryan for putting on the event, and have to give a special shout out to some of the Calvin athletics staff who made this such a special event for these teams that came out. Athletics director Jim Timmer, sports information director Jeff Phoebus, the entire game day crew did a great job. Mike Lefebvre from athletics development, and then coaches Bill Saul and Derek DeVries. Everyone did a ton of work to put this event on, so I'd just like to recognize everyone at Calvin that's put on such a special weekend for these teams and players.
Matt, I don't think we think of ourselves as special people, but we were made to feel special, and the other media who were in attendance, and it was a lot of fun. It's given us a lot to talk about, so we're gonna have some fun here. There was 8 great teams in attendance. We saw them each play 2 games, so we're gonna break it down in terms of how they stack up among the 8 with the GLI power rankings,
We're the
and then we're
D3
gonna.
Datacast. We love rankings, so let's rank these
That's right.
teams, right?
We're gonna do it, and of course, there's a lot else going on around the country in Division 3 basketball. Matt, we expect, or not expect, we will finally get our first in-season top 25 poll, releasing later Monday, I'm sure. So we'll have a new ballot from you to take a look at. We've got picks to review, lots going on. So let's jump right in. All right, let's start, Matt. As we said, we have the 2024 Great Lakes Invitational Power Rankings. This is something we did as we were driving back from Wittenberg last year, and it was just you and me in the car, and we're like, "Hey, how do we think we do this?" But it was a lot of fun to do power rankings, so we wanted to take it to the next level, especially with such um, a great contingent of D3 media there. So we took advantage of that. We've got a voting panel to make this a real like poll style power rankings. Ryan Whitnable, the GLI creator, of course, was taking part in this. You and I representing the D3 Datacast as voters here. Carl Barkley, the man, the myth, the legend behind D3 Direct, was a voter here. Bob Quillman, host of the QCast. And great to have Alec Quate join us as well. He covers John Carroll for Write Down Euclid. So some wide variety. We did this without, kind of conferring with each other, without really a set of instructions as to how you have to stack these teams up. We did say these are the GLI power rankings, so we wanted to really focus on what we saw over those 2 days, not bringing maybe too much preseason expectation or maybe some of the other results we've seen, really trying to focus on what we saw this weekend to make it the true GLI power rankings as opposed to just, ranking these teams more in general. So that's kind of the basis. Yeah, it's great to have this panel together. So let's jump right in, Matt. Starting at number 8 in our list here, that was the Hope Flying Dutchman. They lost to St. John's 64-48. And then Saturday lost to Marietta 96-71. They were represented on the All Invitational team by Gabe Quillen.
Yeah, starting off at the top with the game against St. John's. These two teams came out for the first few minutes. I had been ranking St. John's fairly high in my poll. I did rank Hope in my preseason poll, so they were still ranked for me at this point. But based on some of Hope's results, I had kind of, taken them out, I guess, from a top 25 perspective in my mind. But in the St. John's game to start, I was not sure quite what to make of these two teams. I thought Hope was competing well right off the bat, but they just were really struggling offensively. Both halves, I think they scored under 20 points in each of the first two halves against St. John's, and they just really struggled to find it offensively. If it wasn't really Gabe Quillen scoring, I think there wasn't really much going for Hope, and I think maybe that was the story of both games for the Dutchmen. But really, St. John's was locking them down defensively. Hope didn't really have an answer to score the ball that wasn't Gabe Quillen, and he can't be everywhere at once for them, I think. So really the story for me for Hope for this entire weekend was I think they played good defense, but it was really that offense really struggling to find the scoring touch. They struggled from the three-point line for most of the weekend. And again, Gabe Quillen was great, a worthy kind of all-invitational team member, but really outside of him, there wasn't a lot of scoring options for the Flying Dutchman, I don't think.
Yeah, that first half against St. John's was an offensive grind for both sides, but really for Hope, it's still in single digits there, about 15 minutes into the game. Um, but it wasn't like St. John's had run out to this big lead as a result of it. So it was an interesting game. I think there was a real opportunity. You felt like, okay, well, if Hope could just get some buckets to go, all of a sudden this is a brand new ball game. Forget not being able to basically score for 15 minutes. But it just never really came. Um, and then, we kind of saw that continue against Marietta, as you mentioned. They struggled not reaching the 30-point mark in either half against St. John's, and there was a point there fairly late in the first half where it looked like they were going to struggle to reach that 30-point mark in the first half against Marietta. Of course, they did eventually reach it. The offense picked up, but it was just a little bit too little, too late for the Flying Dutchman. Next up, Matt, after number 8, it would feel natural to go to number 7, but we actually had a tie. So we've got the tie at number 6. So the next slide will put John Carroll, because they also were 0-2 on the weekend, but in a tie for 6th there, they lost to Johns Hopkins 84-69, lost to Emory 90-75, represented on the All-Invitational team by Will Yontek. Matt, the John Carroll outlook for the weekend really changed late in the first half there against Johns Hopkins. With an injury that kept Luke Chacon out for the rest of the game, the rest of the weekend, and possibly will keep him out for much longer than that.
Yeah, they started to trail big against Johns Hopkins, and then to lose Luke Chacon late in that first half like that really changed the dynamic for the second half of what could have been versus Johns Hopkins for that kind of like highlight matchup against Emory for the next night. That was one of the things I was looking forward to. Just really changes the whole look for John Carroll to lose a great player like that, like an All-American type Division III player like Luke Chacon. We don't know exactly what his timeline is, but we did see him in a boot on Saturday, so didn't look great, unfortunately. And John Carroll really struggled in Game 1 against Johns Hopkins. They were not shooting the ball well, and they maybe were trailing by about 20 points or so in the first half or early second half. Did pull that down a little bit in the second half, made a game of it actually, but Johns Hopkins was too much. Against Emory, it was more of the same. I just feel like the Blue Streaks struggled to make shots. Three-point shooting for the entire weekend, all teams, was maybe not great on the whole. Some games had good halves or good games, but for John Carroll, they just could not find it. They're going to have to, like we said, with the injury going forward, is it going to be Luke Frazier? Is it going to be Chase Toppin? Is it going to be Will Jantek? Jantek was solid in both games, got the all-invitational team nod. He was good. Luke Frazier did score a bunch of points. So they have a lot of good players. It's just going to be a different dynamic for them going forward. Unfortunately, they're going to have to find what is the new reality for John Carroll without Chacon. And was really a tough weekend for them. Was really excited to see what they would have this year. I had been voting them really high, and now all of a sudden, one weekend, everything kind of changes for them.
And even before the injury in the first half, John Carroll was really struggling offensively. I think they were never really able to get set up into the kind of game they like to play. And then it was not I don't want to say all downhill from there, because they did really close the gap in the second half against Johns Hopkins. But the total outlook on that game changes when you're missing such an important player, and it was unfortunately reminiscent of a situation that we saw at the Great Lakes Invitational last year with UW Oshkosh losing Jonah Reinflesch very early in the first game there, and then it's like, sorry, you got to bounce back, try to figure out with different personnel, or missing a really important player. Last year they had to turn around and figure out how to play against Redlands the next day, and then John Carroll, no, there's no time to figure out. You've got the next day, you've got Emory. So very tough, very tough. Fortunately, I guess now they'll have a few days to try to figure out, as opposed to just having to turn around and play again the next day against such a tough opponent. And the other team here tied for sixth, Matt, very familiar to the Blue Streaks. It's another OAC team here, the Marietta Pioneers. They got started at the Great Lakes Invitational with a loss to UW La Crosse 99-75, and then got a win against Hope on Saturday 96-71. The all-invitational team member from Marietta was Jalen Bradshaw.
Yeah, Jaden Bradshaw was really
Jaden Bradshaw.
Yeah, Jaden Bradshaw was really impressive to me right away in that first game. He was hitting tons of shots, scored 28 points against UW La Crosse. Unfortunately for the Pioneers, UW La Crosse was like super hot. They made 50% of their three-pointers for the game. So the Pios were just trying to come from behind that entire game. And the next day against Hope, they kind of got a little bit of revenge for what happened to them the first night. They were hitting all their shots as a team that they were just super dynamic against Hope. They were 11 from 20 from the three-point line, so they were over 50%. And again, Bradshaw was great. Frank Wagenfeld was also super great in that game, 27 points for him against Hope. So Marietta, really nice for them. Suffered a big defeat on Friday to bounce back with a big win on Saturday. They looked like a completely different team. I think UW La Crosse had something to say about that the first day. But against Hope, Marietta really had their way and looked really good on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, it was a fairly even game for a while there with La Crosse, and then La Crosse just really turned it on at the end of the first half to end with a 56-point first half. They were shooting lights out from three to really put Marietta behind. And then the script completely flipped the next day against Hope, where it was Marietta putting up a 55-point first half. They were 9 of 11 from three in that first half. Seemed like everything was going down. So it's very interesting to see these kind of events where you see a team one day and one thing happens to them, and then you see them the next day and they're the ones doing basically the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 5, Matt. Our panel voted the St. John's Johnnies. They got a win over Hope on Friday, 64-48. Followed that up. They got the MIAA pairing here. They lost at Kelvin 71-67 in the event's finale. All-invitational team member here, Matt, Ryan Thiessen.
Yeah, the first thing that stuck out to me about St. John's right away when the starting lineup was introduced, and then as players started hitting the court, just how experienced this team is. I think 8 of the first 9 players to enter the game were seniors, and I think the 9th guy was a junior. So tons of experience. They were a team I watched for the first 10 minutes, and I think, like, man, this is like my number 12 team in the country. I'm not exactly sure I see it, but they don't have 1 or 2 guys that will just jump off the page and just score a bunch of points or be super athletic. They have a whole team of guys that can kind of do that. And they're really strong defensively. They're going to wear you out defensively. Like we already mentioned, they held Hope to under 30 points in both halves of that game. They're just going to know what to do. They're going to keep you in front of them. I think that they're going to end up as one of the best defensive teams in D3 this season. I would not be surprised. And the way they jumped out to a big lead, they held Hope early. Hope did kind of come back in that first half, but then the second half, it was all St. John's. I think there was some of that experience. It was that defensive prowess. They just gave Hope no room to operate. And that really just stuck out to me is this is a team, even though they didn't jump off the screen to me while I was watching it live, but they didn't jump out to me. It's just an experienced team that's just going to grind you down. They're not going to beat themselves. They're not going to make their own mistakes. And at the end of the day, you look at them, you're like, man, how's this team doing it? But they're up 16 on Hope, and they look dominant.
Yeah, and I knew it was an experienced team because, there were a lot of names I recognized from years past, but as you said, it's like, they go through the starting lineup, five seniors, and then next guy off the bench, senior, next guy off the bench, senior. As you said, I think it was 8 of 9. Tons of experience. You can tell they really want to lock you down in the half court. They did a great job of that this weekend. I feel like they got some guys that can shoot it a little bit better than they showed this
Yeah.
weekend. It was a little bit of a struggle in terms of the shot making overall, but with that kind of defense, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but they're always going to be in it with that kind of defense. And like you said, it's not going to be flashy. It's not going to be a lot of highlight type plays, although they've got some guys that can go up
Yeah.
and throw it down. But just really solid, really tough to play against. And good luck in the MIAC, I guess.
Yeah, and then game 2 against Calvin, it looked like it was going to be more of the same in that first half. Calvin struggled to score. They weren't
Yep.
shooting the ball well. St. John's had about an 8 or 9 point lead at halftime that they extended to 11 points in the second half. And it's just like, man, this St. John's team, this is what they are. They're just gonna hold you to nothing. They're gonna make you come away with like one shot on a possession. Maybe it's not even a good look. But then Calvin was able to find a way back for St. John's, and that was a great game at the end. But I was impressed with, even though they came out 1-1 with St. John's. I think they're a team that's still definitely top 25 viable, even though they dropped a game here. And like I said earlier, I think they're going to end up. I think I looked up in the efficiency ratings; they're like a top 15 defense. That doesn't surprise me. I think that's what they're going to continue to be. Maybe they won't be the most dynamic offensive team in this country. We'll see how they end up this season, but I think defensively they're about as good as it gets.
Yeah, Matt, that Kelvin game was a really good one. I made a note. It was tied at 45 with about 10 minutes to go. So, you play 30 minutes and it all comes down to that 10-minute ball game. Kelvin had really found themselves there, got themselves to a little bit of a lead. As you know all too well, it's been a little bit of an adventure for Kelvin trying to close out some games. This time they were able to finally do it and get that first win of the season. I know it felt good for the guys to get that payoff of after having played really well against some really good teams, to get one in the W column for Calvin there. Who, speaking of, let's go on to number 4, Matt, where we talk about the Calvin Knights officially. They lost Friday night to Emory, 83-74, and then got that win, as we mentioned, against St. John's, 71-67. On the all invitational team was Owen Varnado, who was really good both days, but I thought was especially good closing out that win against St. John's.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that Emory game first because Emory was great, but I think Calvin played with them the whole game. The final margin shows 9, but this really wasn't, in my mind, a 9-point game. This was like a 4 or 5-point game, and that's the distance that it was. Uchenna Egekeza, the All-American senior grad student for Calvin, was just fantastic, I think, in this game. He was guarding Ben Pierce for Emory. He scored 22 points on his own. Pretty efficient shooting night for him, too. This is kind of when Calvin's at their best. They're getting a mix of scores. They had Egekeza with 22, Varnado with 10, Winkle had 13, Parker Schwartz off the bench had 14 points. They were getting a mix of guys. They were making shots when they needed to. Had a second half lead with, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 minutes left. They still had a lead against Emory, but Emory's really good. And Emory was able to kind of close that one out and then and keep it, extend the lead down the stretch. You were talking about Calvin having trouble closing it. Emory did not have trouble closing this game out. But I was impressed with Calvin. I was really impressed with Emory this whole weekend. But I thought this was another opportunity that they had, the Calvin Knights had to play against a top 10-ish team. We've already seen them do that a couple times, be kind of toe-to-toe, came up just short. I know they were disappointed, but this still showed them to be a dangerous team. And then the next night against St. John's, finally getting that win, getting off the schneid 71-67 victory. I know that meant a lot to the team. And as you mentioned, Owen Varnado was fantastic in that game. And down the stretch, hitting a three-pointer in the second half to kind of extend a lead, hitting some free throws down the stretch. He was good. Egekeza was good both nights as well, but Varnado for the all-invitational team, that feels pretty good as well.
That game against Emory, Matt, that was about as neck and neck of a game as you can have for 39 minutes. I think it was basically 39 minutes played within plus or minus 5 points. I don't know that, maybe someone had a 6 point lead in there briefly, but it felt like no one was able to extend beyond more than 5 points through much of that. And then, the final margin goes as 9, but you look at the way it played out. Egekeza slipped and gets called for a travel on what could have been a game tying layup. So just some things got away from them at the end to make it the 9 point margin. But a heck of a ball game. All right, let's go on to number 3, Matt. I think this kind of closes out a tier that was difficult to separate between number 3, Johns Hopkins here. We talked about Calvin at 4 and St. John's at 5. I think this is where we had the most, I don't want to say disagreement because everyone in our voting panel had kind of these teams in this range, but this is where we saw the most variation. But the voting came out here with Johns Hopkins as the number 3 team in our GLI power rankings. The Blue Jays got a win on Friday night against John Carroll, 84-69, and then took a loss to UW Crosse, 76-59. And Matt, the thing I think that's really important to highlight in that John Carroll game, because we've talked about the injury to Chacon, and how that really changes the outlook of John Carroll. But before that happened, right out of the gate, Hopkins really jumped out in front. They had like the dream start. Brian Johansson especially was very good to start that game. He had, I think, 8 quick points. Hopkins got out to a nice lead and really took charge of that game. And I think we're responsible for keeping John Carroll out of getting that game into the kind of game that they wanted to play.
Yeah, they were really impressive against John Carroll. Even in that first half, before the injury, they were dominating that game. They looked as good as anyone. I was thinking around. We're talking about other teams in the Centennial Conference. We know Swarthmore's been great. We know Gettysburg's getting a lot of attention this year. And I'm thinking, how is Johns Hopkins not the team that's going to win the Centennial Conference? How is anyone in the country going to beat a team like Johns Hopkins? It looked like, not that things were easy for them against John Carroll, but they were hitting shots. They had tons of different players that were able to score, that were able to defend. You mentioned Johansson. Windley was the Alt Invitational team member here. I was really impressed with Jeb Williams in that first game. He was making huge shots. He was just kind of like a big guard that can do a whole lot. I think he's just only a sophomore. Johns Hopkins has this really good mix of experience and youth. I think that they're a team that's still going to continue to come together as the season goes on. And in that John Carroll game, they just looked, maybe that's the best version of Johns Hopkins. They looked like they could beat anyone. They looked like, and here they were playing a team that's thought to be one of the best teams in the country, and they were dominating them, and they really dominated that game. They looked great. And for as much as they kind of rolled in game 1, Game 2 against UW La Crosse was a struggle for them. Things weren't quite as easy. La Crosse made things difficult on them. The shot making that at times seemed so easy against John Carroll just wasn't there. They were still good. They still had a lot of those same players doing those same dynamic type things, but it was a lot more difficult against La Crosse than it was for John Carroll. And I think that's where some of the disparity of the voting panel here, just seeing two different teams, the same team, but in two different ways on back-to-back days, kind of was like, wow, how good exactly is Johns Hopkins? Really impressive day 1. Day 2, okay, maybe still a little bit of a work in progress.
Yeah, it's interesting to see just how differently teams are made up, right? Because Hopkins is not, I don't think you would say they're a big team at the spots that you usually look for size. But, in the backcourt, they're pretty big.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
they're
maybe.
just one of those teams that they're like kind of 6'3" to 6'7" across the board. So yeah, they don't have huge size down low necessarily. But there's not a lot of teams that have guards that or wings that are as long and as athletic and strong as they have. So it's a very interesting team, and you know, I guess maybe that matched up okay with John Carroll, and then was a little bit more difficult for Lacrosse. Lacrosse played them very tough defensively. There wasn't a lot of room for Hopkins to operate, uh, and yeah, just very interesting to see how that played out over the course of 2 different days. Number two in the power rankings, Matt, we're the Eagles of UW Lacrosse. A very impressive win against Marietta, 99-75, and then another really impressive win against Johns Hopkins, 76-59. Dustin DeRusso was the all-invitational team member from the Eagles. And, Matt, the story for UW Lacrosse for me was that Friday night, they were so impressive offensively. And then I felt
Yeah.
like Saturday, they were equally impressive for what they did on the defensive end. I feel like, over the course of those 2 games, we really saw complete performances on both ends of the court from UW Lacrosse. Hard to not come away really impressed with the 2 wins they got, but just the way they got them.
Yeah, when we do power ranking type things on this shows, we often like to talk about tiers, and I think we just jumped up a tier with UW Lacrosse, and I think you're exactly right. They showed top notch performances on both end of the court. They were really strong offensively. They could show it really strong defensively. They did it for 40 minutes both games. Right away against Marietta, they were hitting every shot. I don't even know what the number was. They hit like their first 8, 9, 10, whatever it was, 3-pointers. They could not miss, and played good defense in that game and held Marietta. Besides Bradshaw, I think it was tough scoring for Marietta. The next day against Johns Hopkins, a team that it's not like they could score at will against John Carroll, but they made things look a little bit easy offensively. UW Lacrosse did a great job keeping those big long guards in front of them, not allowing them to operate, move the ball, get into the paint. I really like the way that Coach Gritzmacher has the UW Lacrosse team playing. They're playing tough. You kept mentioning it to me as the weekend went on that you had thought last year that they were getting better as the season progressed. I think they're up a notch this year. I can really see them competing in the WIAC. Maybe they're the number one team in the WAC. I'm not quite sure that's going to be a strong league, but I don't think they're going to get pushed around necessarily. They're going to take a loss or two here or there, or 3 or 4, but as the best teams always do in that conference. But they looked really good this weekend, both games, both ends of the courts. Really just a complete team in my estimation.
That Lacrosse Hopkins game was really intense, and even in the first half, I think some of us were saying to ourselves or to each other, even that it had the feel of like a second round or Sweet 16 type tournament game,
Yeah.
and it would be a surprise to see either of those teams in that spot, a few months down the line here. Okay, Matt, Lacrosse was a unanimous number 2 on everyone's ballots. There was a unanimous number 1. The that goes to the Emory Eagles. We talked about the win at Calvin, 83-74. We've talked about the win versus John Carroll on Saturday, 90-75. The all-invitational team nod goes to Jair Knight, who was also named the 2024 GLI MVP. It was well deserved. I think Emory stood out as the best team, and Jair Knight certainly stood out as the best player.
Yeah, agree with that. And I think in particular on Friday night against Calvin, that was kind of the Jair Knight show. He did everything. Like you said, most of that game was kind of played 4 or 5 points either way. A lot of it felt like Emory would get up 3 or 4 points. Calvin would take several possessions to reel them back in and maybe tie the game. And then it was a 3-pointer, probably by Jair Knight, and be boom, Emory back up 3. And that's kind of how it went for a lot of the game. He's listed as like a 6'2" guard, but he can jump as high as anyone. He's as likely to be above the rim as anyone. He's handling the ball well. He's stepping out and hitting those outside shots. In the game against Calvin, he was 5 of 9 from 3-pointers. He made 8 of 9 free throws, 31 points, 11 rebounds. He was just fantastic, and he gave Calvin a lot of trouble just because he can do so much. He's always a mismatch, even though he's small. He's athletic and powerful and skilled, and he can do everything on the court. You almost have to treat him like a forward with guard skills, even though he's only 6'2", just because, like I said, he can get up, he can catch that lob, he can rebound, go up and pull down a one-handed rebound. He can block shots from bigs on the other team. We saw crazy blocks from him. So yeah, well deserving
Rebounding.
MVP. Yeah, he's just a great player all around.
Yeah, probably the best rebounding guard in Division 3. Gotta be. Um, yeah, and Matt, we like to show the D3 dunks. We our YouTube channels featuring highlight dunks, and Jair Knight's been a guy who shows up multiple times there, but um, that's not all he is. He's a complete player,
Yeah.
and really impressive to see him in person. Uh, and he's one of those guys that you just find yourself watching, and probably he jumps off an online stream, but I don't feel like you can get the full appreciation until you see him in person. Um, and that he's just one of those players. I felt that same way against Miles Barnstable when we got to see
Yeah.
Whitewater in Fort Wayne. You get a different appreciation. Didn't realize he was as quick as he was. So it really fun to be able to see some of these guys. Like, how often are we going to see a Division 3 team from Atlanta? But the chance to see Emory there at the Great Lakes Invitational was awesome, and that's what makes this event so great.
Yeah, and I said it was the Jair Knight show against Calvin, but really, if you want to say one thing that Emory did to win that game, it was offensive rebounding in general, and Knight was a part of that, but it was the whole team. Emory was really just killing Calvin on the offensive glass, second chance opportunities. If Calvin had been able to end some possessions earlier and rebound the ball on their defensive end and not give Emory second chance points, this could have very well been a Calvin victory. So that, if you want to point to one thing, why did Emory beat Calvin? 21 offensive rebounds to just 29 defensive rebounds for Calvin. That's going to go a long way in a game like that. And that was the whole team. Everyone was hitting the glass for Emory.
Matt, a lot of games there that are going to have a big impact on the new top 25 that we expect to see at some point. Late afternoon, early evening is when we usually see it on a Monday. So a little bit after this episode will go out on Monday morning. There's 25 ballots out there. You have one of them. So let's talk about what's happened, not just this past week, but since the ball got tipped, because all we've had to work off of so far was the preseason poll. This will be our first in-season poll. Last week we talked about how the preseason poll was basically irrelevant based on everything we had seen so far. So I made you go through the exercise of creating a mock ballot, and I'm wondering how helpful that was in having to now do your real ballot heading into this next week.
It was helpful in the fact that I didn't have to consider all 3 weeks of results all at once. I'd kind of done some determining on what had happened before. But then again, I still made a lot of changes from last week. So people who watched last week's episode, there's still a lot of changes because a lot happened. And it's amazing. We go through 1 week of basketball, 2 weeks of basketball, and I keep thinking to myself, well, after we see these next sets of matchups, then I'm going to know more and I'm going to know where to put things. But in some ways, things get clarified, and then some things get even more confusing. But this is anyway the ballot that I submitted for this week. That'll come out on Monday early evening, typically. I'll read down the list for the podcast only folks, but the YouTube people can see it right on the screen. I'm going with a new number 1 right now, Trine, defending national champions. They're undefeated so far. They're putting up big scoring margins against the teams they typically should put up a big scoring margins. I think they're really good. And for right now, I'm not saying they're always going to have to be this way, but right now, until someone knocks them off, they're number 1. But we'll see. They have some teams right behind them that are putting up good results as well, like number 2, Illinois Wesleyan. We saw them in person this year. They're big, they're athletic, they're very skilled. I think they're as good as anyone. And a team we just talked about at number 3, Emory. I think those three teams to me right now are the 3 I was kind of debating what order do I want them in. And right now it's Trine 1, Illinois Wesleyan 2, Emory 3. Number 4, Wash U. Really interested in seeing them play maybe some higher level competition as the season goes on. They return a whole bunch as well. Trinity, Connecticut, kind of the same thing. They're holding kind of steady where I've had them here at number 5. I jumped Tufts up to number 6. I think they've been strong in the preseason, looking to see what they have to do. Interesting team for me here at number 7 is Hampton-Sydney. They're a team that I didn't vote for in the preseason. I had very high on my mock ballot last week, and now I dropped them a little bit this week after a loss to Gettysburg. I didn't drop them all the way down even behind Gettysburg because I still think that they've played a really tough schedule so far and they've gotten good results against that. And I'm still going to reward them for that tough schedule that they've played and those good results that they have gotten, like, for example, against Christopher Newport, who I have at 8. So Hampton City still hanging in there at 7. Newport at 8. NYU at number 9. And then new entrant into my poll at 10 is Gettysburg. They're undefeated. They have that win at Hampton City. They're looking really good. So I jumped them from out all the way into my top 10. Excited to see what they have this year. At number 11 is Worcester, another new entrant in. They were a watch list team for me to start the year. I think they've had good results. They look good, putting them in at number 11. Wisconsin Lutheran at 12. That's kind of holding serve for me. Whitworth is a team I talked about last week in my mock ballot at number 13. Here, UW La Crosse jumps in for me at number 14. I'm really impressed with what I saw at the GLI. They do have a loss on the year to Nebraska Wesleyan, so we'll see how things go. But I was really impressed with what I saw, so I'm kind of like eye testing them all the way up to 14. I think they look good. That was the Nebraska Wesleyan loss is one they shot less than 30% from the 3-point line. So we'll just see how that shooting goes for them. I thought the defense looked strong. Keene State at 15. They had a big road win on Sunday at Williams, so that was good. But that's still kind of holding serve for me and for Keene State. But I was impressed with that Sunday win. UW Platteville at 16. Still trying to figure out what exactly they are. I had high expectation for the Pioneers coming into the season. And they've been pretty good, but not as good as I thought. So hanging out there at 16, middle of the poll. I want to see what comes. WPI at 17. I think I talked about them last week in my mock ballot. Here's St. John's Falls to 18. They were 4-0 until the loss to Calvin. I'm not going to punish them too much for a road loss at Calvin in a game that they were right in. I think that's still a rankable team in St. John's. I think that they're still good. I think they're still almost definitely the MIAC favorites. So I feel good about keeping them in my poll. Trinity, Texas at 19. I think that's relatively holding serve for them. TCNJ at 20. And then at 21, Roanoke, an ODAC team that is going to jump into the poll for me. I'm really excited to see what Roanoke can do. They're sitting there at 1 loss, but I think they have some strong results and some large margin victories. Middlebury, another NESCAC. I have a few NESCACs in the poll already. They're coming in at number 22 for me. I think they've played, is it just 3 games so far? But I think I'm interested in their results to see what Middlebury can do this year. Anderson at 23 is a team that's surprising to me. I think the whole offseason story about Anderson was players transferring elsewhere. I had no idea what to make of them. They have 1 loss on the season, and it's a road loss at Trine, and it was a game that they were right in. And I think Trine's the number 1 team in the country. Anderson has beaten Hope. They've beaten Carthage, and they were right there with Trine. So they're a really interesting team. I'm going to be watching the Ravens. Guilford is still sticking in my poll at number 24. And then another ODAC at 25, Virginia Wesleyan. Their lone loss is overtime loss against Christopher Newport. So I'm hanging in with the Marlins, and that is my top 25 for the week.
Yeah, Anderson is a team. Remember, we highlighted last week in our little upset watch as we like to pick out some games of ranked teams against unranked opponents. And while neither of us were really all that high on an upset occurring there, it was about trying to see what that margin might look like. Trine, as you've mentioned, has had some very big results. They uh, put up a huge margin in a win over Elmhurst. They have had a big win over Mary Hardin Baylor, and so to see Anderson be there, in a close game, I think is instructive, and that's going to be a team to watch for a team that no one really seemed to know what to make of heading into the season.
Yeah.
Has suddenly looked very interesting, for games they've won and for being right there with Trine. So I think it's a little bit of a step of faith, but one that the Ravens have earned. And Matt, I got to say, between 21, 24, 25, and then Randolph Macon likely, just under the cut line here for your top 25. I feel like you're kind of saying, there's some other ODAC teams in the mix. I'm not really sure uh, how heavily or exactly who they might be. So not surprising in a league as deep as the ODAC, but there's a lot to be sorted out there.
Yeah, that's a league maybe not as top heavy as it was last year, with just the top quality at the top, but still very deep. Still a bunch of teams in this ranked conversation. I don't know exactly who it will be. I know we're going to get some wild results in conference play. These teams are going to probably beat each other up because I don't. We'll have to see. I don't know if anyone's quite as good as last year, but there's still a bunch of great teams, obviously. So yeah, I do have a lot of ODAX in once again, but that's not really a surprise, is it?
No, it is not. It is not. All right, Matt, let's go on to the picks, starting with our review of last week's picks.
Yeah, I'll run them down. Carthage was 5-point underdogs at UW Platteville, but Platteville won that game by 13, and you and I both had Carthage, so we both miss that pick. Whitworth was a 1.5-point underdog at Cal Lu. We both went with the Kingsmen, but it was the Whitworth Pirates who won by 5 outright, so we both miss that pick. Stevens was 2-point underdogs at Middlebury. Middlebury won that game by 11, and Zach, you and I were both correct on Middlebury. Co was playing against UW Whitewater. We went opposite directions on this one. You had Co plus 2.5 points. They won that game by 14, so you win that pick. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week was at Calvin at the Great Lakes Invitational. Emory and John Carroll. John Carroll was 1.5-point favorites in that game, but it was Emory who won that game by a 90-75 score. And Emory gets the point. I get the point there. So to recap our scoreboard, running scoreboard, we were both 2 and 3. That brings you to 6 and 9 overall. I am 7 and 8 overall. We're both kind of struggling a little bit, Zach, but I maintain a 1-game lead. We're both under 500. I'm sure Ryan Scott down in the comments is destroying us as usual. We have a few other players down there as well, so that's cool to see the picks. Keep a running tally of your score and keep making your picks down in the comments, and we love to see them.
Yeah, I would have liked to have had a repick on that game of the week after, Friday night, Saturday morning, but
There's no repicks. You don't get it. All right, let's look at this week's games. A new slate ahead of us, Zach. Starting at the top, 2 teams that we just saw at the Great Lakes Invitational that did not play, but they will play each other this week. UW La Crosse and St. John's. St. John's comes as 3.5-point favorites. Remember, you bring 2 games, I bring 2 games. We agree on a game of the week, and then we throw these through the computer, and it predicts a scoring margin. So our first one predicts St. John's by 3.5 points. Their next game is Greenville against Grinnell, 2 system teams. That's a 15-point favorite for Grinnell. And just out of interest, the computer projects a total score of 281 points in that one, just to keep an eye on. Our third game is Yeshiva at Trinity, Connecticut. That's a 17.5-point predicted scoring margin. Trinity is the favorite there. Game number 4 is Babson, 2-point underdogs on the road at Brandeis. And our game of the week this week is going to be WPI and Tufts, 2 teams we just talked about in my top 25 poll. Tufts is favored by 4. So let's go back to the top and make our picks. Zach, you first. UW La Crosse and St. John's.
Matt, we're recording this on a Sunday, an NFL Sunday. Observers of the NFL may know about the up-down nature of the NFL. So I feel like based on what we just saw at the Great Lakes Invitational, I should be leaning La Crosse. But I've got my new St. John's basketball shirt here, thanks to the staff out there. And I like I mentioned, St. John's is a really good defensive team. You can see that, and I think they've got some guys that can shoot it a lot better than what we saw this weekend. I think I think this is going to be a really interesting game coming out of this event. This is one of the matchups I really wanted to see. So give me St. John's.
Okay. I'm going to go more in line with what our power ranking poll just said. I'm going to take, even though it's on the road, but 3.5-point underdog UW La Crosse. I'm gonna take those points and maybe pick UW La Crosse to win outright. I think they can definitely keep it within 3.5 points, but they might win that game outright. The next game, Greenville and Grinnell, 2 system teams. We almost should have just picked against the over/under total on this one.
Over/under. That would have been fun.
That would have been fun. But who do you want against that 15-point scoring line? Oh, you're just pulling out all the shirts. You got a Grinnell shirt. Is this like the headgear show?
I guess it is. Yeah. Matt, I feel like this is a system game involving 2 system teams. You got to go with the OG, right? As the favorite. So give me Grinnell. 15 points usually seems like a big number, but when the total is 281, that's not a big number.
No, in this game, that's like 2 possessions, right? 15 points.
Feels like it.
I'm gonna go the same direction, and I like you thought, man, can I do 15 points? But it's a system game for both teams. There's gonna be tons of possessions. I feel like Grinnell's the team that's doing it better right now as well. So I'm gonna pick Grinnell. I think they're of the two, they're the team that might be like an NCAA tournament type team, whereas I don't think Greenville is that. So I think 15 in this type of a game is not actually that much. It's a lot, but maybe not. So I'm gonna go with Grinnell.
You know, even if it's in hand for Grinnell, what are you going to do? How do you clear the benches when you already play your entire bench?
Yeah. Yep. All right, game number 3, Yeshiva, 17.5 point dogs at Trinity. Zach, is that line just too big?
You could just say that's too big. I'm going to take Yeshiva, but Matt, we've still got a decent amount of preseason projection here in the computer, and I feel like of the teams, how different are these teams going to be compared to what they were last year? I feel like Yeshiva is going to be more different to the positive than Trinity maybe. Trinity might be a very similar team to what they were last year. So I think that at this point in the season, the computer may not have fully caught up to what Yeshiva will actually be this season. So I'm gonna lean with the Max.
Are you going to hold up a Max shirt?
I do not have a
Okay.
Max
All
shirt.
right.
So, Poppers, as you're watching this, I can send you my address. You can get me some Max
All
gear.
right. So you're going to go with Yeshiva. I'm going to go. I think I agree with your analysis on the computer lines as well. But for me, this is a big line, 17 and a half. I think, yes, last year is still playing into it. I think Yeshiva is probably better than that. Trinity maybe is similar to last year. Who knows? Maybe not quite as good. They were in the Final Four last year, so you almost expect anyone in that position not to be quite as good. But yeah, 17 and a half, I think, is just going to be too big of a line. In our fourth game out in Region 2, Babson and Brandeis, 6 point line. Zach, your pick.
I'm thinking about this pick really similarly to the last one. I think Brandeis is going to be better than last year, and probably the magnitude of difference to what they were last year compared to what Babson was last year is more favorable towards Brandeis. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Brandeis here.
Yeah, for me, this was a really interesting game looking at just how the teams have performed. Babson, I think, was maybe the coaches poll preseason NUMAC pick at this point, but to me, they haven't really gotten the results that kind of suggested. I think Brandeis is looking strong. I think Brandeis, for me, of the two, is probably the team that's more of like a watch list top 25 team. So even though the line is 6, that's a pretty big line for a game like this. I'm going to go with the Brandeis judges as well. Pick the same way as you. I think they're looking strong. I'm going to go with the UAA team here. And then for our game of the week, WPI and Tufts. It's a 4 point line. What do you think?
Not a lot of conviction in this one, Matt. I kind of went back and forth, but a 4 point line, that's not a lot with this being a true home game for Tufts. So I'm gonna go with the Jumbos.
Yeah, Zach, I'm going to go with the Jumbos as well. 4 points is, maybe a point and a half bigger than home court advantage in this game. And I think Tufts is probably a couple of points better than WPI. At least that's where I'm kind of having them in my top 25 ballot. So for me, it just came down to how good do I think these two teams are? What's the home court? So yeah, 4 points seems like it's about right, but maybe I would go more like 4.5 or 5. So to be forced to pick a side on this one, I'm going to go with Tufts as well.
Okay, Matt, for upset watch this week, I went through and picked a couple more games here. Maybe not upsets that will actually happen, but some interesting ranked versus unranked games. As we're sitting here without the release of the first in-season poll, it's still number 16, Illinois Wesleyan, although we expect that to change to look much more impressive for the ranking for the Titans. They're going to play Chicago on the 27th, and I'm thinking about this game kind of similarly to that Trine Anderson one we highlighted. Chicago is a team that a lot of people seem to expect to be much better this year than they were a year ago. So interesting to see with what Illinois Wesleyan has shown this year. To see, I think the Titans are good favorites here, but what does that final score end up looking like? I think that's going to say a lot about maybe a step that Chicago is expected in a lot of ways to take this season.
Yeah, you're right. First and foremost, As we record this, like you said, they're number 16. We expect probably most voters will be putting them in the top 10, if not top 5. So this will shift more toward the Illinois Wesleyan. But yeah, for Chicago, this is going to be a good measuring stick game for them. Feels like this was a team that was young in the UAA for a few years. Now maybe they're finally more of an old, experienced team in the UAA, and maybe this is maybe the culmination of a few years of building. So to see what Chicago is going to have this year, like you, I expect Illinois Wesleyan to win this one and probably fairly comfortable. But it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Interesting one to watch. Chicago is going to get this level of competition in their conference, so it's a good one for them as well.
And number 11, Trinity, will be out in Southern California, highlighting their game here against Pomona Pitzer on the 29th. Uh, this is under the old system with the regional rankings in Region 10. This would be a really interesting to watch. You got Trinity expected to be one of the best teams in Texas. Pomona Pitzer is always one of the best teams in Southern California. And these are the type of head-to-head games that in the old system would really help determine how those Region 10 rankings came out. Of course, that's not a real concern in the NPI national list type environment we find ourselves now. But, head-to-head wins still mean that, as this game counts on your resume, the winning team is going to be getting more credit than the losing team. So still very important. And Pomona Pitzer, one of those teams that is always kind of in the top 25 mix. And Trinity's had a really interesting start to the season. I don't think they play their first home game until something like mid or late December. They played a lot of road, a lot of neutral court games. Um, they've weathered that storm, kind of navigated it so far, but you gotta wonder if eventually that takes its toll. And just regardless of that, Trinity, Pomona Pitzer, that's a big Region 10 interesting game.
Yeah, I like this one a lot as kind of an upset watchy type game. Trinity, Texas, I expect them on Monday to stay ranked. I still had them ranked, but they're a team as their scores have come through and I've watched the results come in. It's like I've wanted to see them win by a larger scoring margin. And if you're playing closer with teams that maybe you should be beating, a team like Pomona Pitzer is a team that's going to come up and maybe bite you. Pomona Pitzer is no stranger to the top 25, but I don't think they're there this year. Well, they're obviously not ranked, but I don't think they will be ranked, and they still have some things to figure out. But this is going to be an interesting game. This is a game that Pomona Pitzer could win, and I'm excited to see it on the 29th.
So there's just a couple more games to keep an eye on. A little bit interesting trying to come up with a list here without an updated top 25 or an updated or a top 25 poll that's essentially 3 weeks old at this point because there's of course some teams that we figure will definitely be falling out, maybe some teams moving in, but if you're sticking to kind of what we know in terms of the in and the out, these are two to highlight here.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up as we always do with the mailbag. Matt, we have one mailbag item here from Drew Latrenta. Will the later weeks of the show in February be more bracketology and 500-mile focused with no regional rankings to break down and quibble? Matt, this is something we've talked. We like
Yeah.
to have a plan, and certainly it's been easy to try to knock out episodes each week, predicting the regional rankings and then reacting to the regional rankings when they finally are released and how they do or did not line up with our expectations. But now that's all gone, so that basically changes our content plan for the final month of the season.
Yeah, we spent most of February predicting the rankings and then kind of doing a middle of the week bonus show episode reacting to the rankings, what we think the committee was doing, some of maybe what we thought that they got right, maybe some of the stuff that we disagreed with, and then talked about what the implications of those with regionally ranked wins. As you said, that all changes. So we're going to have our content plan change as well. I don't think we've exactly nailed it down. We'll probably have some NPI focused content and some, like you said, bracketing type content. But the NPI is going to change, so you don't want to spend all February talking about bracketing because who gets in and who gets out can really change the shuffle a whole lot too.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. It'll be good. It'll be good
do.
stuff.
We always do. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, that wraps up the mailbag for this week. If you have anything for us to react to, questions to ask, you can find us on social media like Drew did here on X. You can leave a message on this episode and we will find it and we'd love to talk about what you want us to talk about. That brings us to the end of another show, a show we couldn't do without our great supporters who partner with us through Patreon at patreon.com/D3Datacast. Matt, we have some special shout outs. Mark Rindflesh and Dennis McCarthy joined us as Great Job team members. We got a growing list here, and that is great to see. We are so thankful for the support. People who join us in helping us put on this show, help us to get out to events like the Great Lakes Invitational, get out to events like the SICMA uh, tournament there at Illinois Wesleyan, get us to the Final Four, and to keep D3Datacast.com free of paywalls and advertising.
Yeah, we really appreciate the support. We really appreciate helping to keep D3Datacast.com ad-free. Those who have decided to partner with us, we appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Zach, that brings us out for the week. We got one thing left to say. Good job, team.
Good job, team.